All right, chapter 4 of the book of Galatians. We're getting well into this book here. In this chapter, this is a bit of a continuation from the discussion that Paul had last chapter about being the children of Abraham. So in this chapter, he's going to get more into the idea of the law of adoption. Like, how does this work to bring Jews and Gentiles into the same Abrahamic family, basically? So some interesting things for us to think about in this chapter here. So verse 1, now I say that the heir, as long as he is a child, differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all. Now, this is really interesting to point out, that an heir who is the descendant of so think of a family, okay, in the Old Testament, you have your husband who's the ruler over all of it, then his wife who is connected to him, so she has some authority through him vicariously. Then you have children of them, they're the ones that are heirs to the wealth of the family. Then servants are below them. And what he's saying here is the heir differeth nothing from a servant, though he be Lord of all. So he's bringing up servants as equal with the children of the parents, basically. Now, what's fascinating about this is if you think about this in the relation to the prodigal son analogy, the son disowns his dad, treats his dad as if he's dead, breaks all covenants with him, doesn't want to be his son anymore, breaks that covenant, goes out on his own with his inheritance, blows it all, then comes back only to be a servant in his dad's house. And his dad brings him up and puts him back at the son status, basically. So you can kind of see this theme in this redemption idea, okay? That's what Paul's really getting at, this concept of redemption. Verse 2, he says, but is under tutors and governors until the time appointed of the father. So again, the children and the servants are all there. So he's seeing children as lineal descendants, servants as the non-lineal descendants. They are equal. They are adopted equally into the family. So Abraham, we could see this idea of Abraham and Sarah, or even God, if you want to think of heavenly parents, and then the children of God. He's using the idea of a servant being a non-Jewish person coming into the family would be a servant in the time frame that he's in. But he's saying, nope, servants and children are all equal to the parents. Verse 3, even so, we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. But when the fullness of the time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law, to redeem them that were under the law, that we might receive the adoption of sons. So this is how it works, okay? Verse 3 again, we were the children, we were in bondage under the elements of the world. So natural forces are going against us. We're being held down. Sin, those kinds of things, destruction is holding us down. But when the completion or fullness of time was come, God sent his Son to us. And I like he points out, made of a woman. He entered this world the same way the rest of us do as well. He was made under the law, just like the rest of us were, but he rose to fulfill the law and took that and redeemed us from under the law. So under the natural forces, under the sins, the natural desires of our mortal bodies, to elevate us to a new realm. And that's the adoption. We can now be adopted into the family of God because of the atonement of Christ, basically. Verse 6, and because ye are sons, or daughters, really, we can make this more generic, God hath sent forth the Spirit of his Son into your hearts, crying, Abba, Father. So that's the Spirit comes to witness to us that Christ wants us to follow the Father. Very important. Now, here's the beauty of this. I know in the LDS faith, there is a very strong teaching of Heavenly Mother. If you think about these first 6 verses as a family type idea, Heavenly Mother is assumed into this. If there's a Heavenly Father, then there must be a Heavenly Mother. We can see that assumption in here, which is really cool to think about. So that's the beauty of what this is. Now let's continue on with verse 7 here. Wherefore thou art no more a servant, okay, but a son or daughter, And if a son or daughter, then an heir of God through Christ. This is another well versed verse. A lot of people quote this verse all the time. So the prodigal son, again, blew his inheritance and thought to be just a servant, but his dad wanted him to be his son again. So that metaphor, that parable that Christ taught, Paul is using to teach more of the doctrines and ideas. This is the doctrine of redemption. That's what this is. Verse 8, howbeit then, when ye knew not God, ye did service unto them which by nature are no gods. So what in verse 8 he's talking about is you didn't know who the real God was, and so you served idols. You served false gods because you didn't understand who the real God was. But, verse 9, now after that ye have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto ye desire again to be in bondage? So this is Paul going, guys, we taught you how to connect with God. You felt his spirit. You've had truth confirmed to you. Why are you going back to old ways of doing things that you know are not true? You're going back into idolatry. You're worshiping false gods again. Why are you following worldly philosophy when you shouldn't be? You don't need to go back and do that. You need to stay with what you know, what the Spirit has told you to be true. That's what he's getting at here, basically. So that's the challenge that's going on. Okay, they're in bondage again. They're gone back into sin. And he's like, you got to get out of that. God has changed that. Okay. Now, what's interesting in verse 10 too, let's continue on here. Ye observe days and months and times and years. Now that might sound weird. Why is that a verse? What point does that verse have? Well, if we look at this, he's talking about the observance of religious days. You observe the religious days even though you don't believe in it. Or you're observing the religious days of the pagan religions too. Verse 11, I am afraid of you, lest I have bestowed upon you labor in vain. Paul's upset. He's like, guys, I'm afraid that my whole missionary efforts to you were worthless. Looking at what you guys are dealing with now. Brethren, so this is verse 12, brethren, I beseech you, be as I am, for I am as ye are, ye have not injured me at all. Now what Paul's saying here is, I am like you, trying to do my best. Okay, like I'm trying to follow Christ. I'm trying to do my best. I'm not perfect at it, but I'm trying. Follow my example. Let's keep working on this, basically. Now, what's interesting, the word brethren, of course, I mentioned this, I think in chapter 3, the word brethren here is, in the Greek, a generic term. So he's talking about brothers and sisters, I beseech you, be as I am, for I am as ye are. Ye have not injured me at all. So he's like, guys, look, let's just follow God. Do our best to follow God. Okay? That's what we need to be doing. Verse 13, ye know how through infirmity of the flesh I preach the gospel unto you at the first. So he's reminding them he had a hard time physically. He was probably sick or dealing with disability or other issues he had during his missionary efforts to these people the first time. He says, I preach to you despite the problems I had personally, my physical problems, my challenges that I was experiencing at that time. I was sick. I had health problems and issues, but I still taught you the gospel. Verse 14, and my temptation, which was in my flesh, ye despised not, nor rejected, but received me as an angel of God, even as Jesus Christ. So what's interesting about this, when it says nor rejected, another translation is you did not spit, which was a superstitious gesture to ward off the demonic influence thought to emanate from victims of certain diseases. So back then, the idea was if you had a disease, it was because you were possessed by a demon. And so we would spit on you to ward off the demon, basically, to stay away from me and hopefully get the demon out of you. And he says, basically what he's saying here is, even though I had a problem, I had a sickness, you did not despise me. You worked with me and you saw me as an angel of God. You felt the Spirit confirm the truth of what I was saying to you. And that's why you accepted me. So verse 15, he says, "Where is then the blessedness ye spake of? For I bear you record that if it had been possible, ye would have plucked out your own eyes and have given them to me." Now that sounds strange. But here's the thing we want to look at with this, okay? What Paul is saying here is, where is the joy you once had? When he says, "Where is the blessedness you spake of?" Where's the joy? Where is the happiness you had when you had the Spirit with you? They've fallen into inactivity. They are struggling to have a good life because they're following the worldly philosophies. They had once received Paul's teachings and with great happiness, as if he were an angel, but that happiness was now gone. So the Jewish Christian teachers who had led the Galatian saints astray had opposed Paul and imposed the burdens of the Mosaic law upon the people, leading to a loss of happiness. The gospel of Jesus Christ, on the other hand, is meant to bring lasting joy. If you cannot feel lasting joy in your life, not just contentment or happiness of the world, but lasting real joy, you're missing the gospel. Live the gospel of Jesus Christ. Follow Jesus. That's important, okay? That was out of the New Testament Study Manual, by the way, that quote. So the interesting thing about this verse 2 is Paul mentions in here, you guys, you wanted to help me, even to the point where you're going to pluck your own eyes out and give them to me so I could replace my eyes with your eyes. Now we know that doesn't work. I mean, surgically, you can't just, like, there's not like a USB plug in the back. You just unhook, pull the eye out, plug a new one in like you would like a robot. But he's mentioning this, that they would go to great lengths to help him. We've talked about in the past where Paul's suffering from an eye malady. We don't know what eye malady it is. Could be glaucomas, could be macular degeneration, could be a myriad of other things. But the people were so willing to help him that they almost were getting to the point of, I'm willing to give you if I could give you my eye, I would. They're willing to sacrifice to that point, which is amazing to think about. That's like a law of consecration type level of love. I'm willing to change my life and negatively impact my life to allow you to have a better life. That's consecration. So that's what they're talking about here in verse 15. So verse 16, am I therefore become your enemy because I tell you the truth? So again, he's going, guys, we taught you the truth and you've gone away from it. Come back to it. Why are you treating me negatively now? Am I your enemy now because I'm teaching you the truth that you used to know? Let's be honest. Let's talk about this, okay? There is no my truth. There is the truth, and there's opinions. Let's get back to the truth. That's what he's saying, but we need to be open to admitting that what we currently know might not be the full truth before we can get back to more truth. So he's trying to get him to come back. So verse 17, they zealously affect you, but not well, meaning these Jewish Christians that are opposing Paul. Yea, they would exclude you that ye might affect them. But it is good to be zealously affected always in a good thing, and not only when I am present with you. My little children, of whom I travail in birth, again until Christ be formed in you. And I like this part. This is so fascinating and this is, ladies, I hope you're paying attention. Paul is using female terminology to describe missionary work, to talk about the value of the gospel. And I think that's kind of a cool thing, that he's equating missionary efforts to birthing people. But it's this idea of labor. Missionary work is a labor of love, of showing kindness, sacrifice, giving of yourself to bless others, to help them to grow and improve. So again, women, the importance of women and women's perspectives is showing up here again in this. This is so fascinating, so cool. Verse 20, I desire to be present with you now and to change my voice, for I stand in doubt of you. So I want to be with you, and I'm doubting where you guys are at right now, and I don't want to doubt you anymore. I want to know you're confident in the faith. Verse 21, tell me, ye that desire to be under the law, do ye not hear the law? So again, he's addressing those Jewish Christians, those people that are going, if you believe you're supposed to follow the law, do you not understand what the law really means? Verse 22, he's going to point Paul's going to point some things out here. For it is written, so now Paul's going to be quoting scripture, that Abraham had two sons, the one by a bondmaid and the other by a free woman. Remember this story? This is actually some of the research I'm doing right now as I'm recording this for my college classes. The bondmaid and the free woman. Sarah was the free woman. The bondmaid is Hagar. Okay, Sarah had Isaac, who had Jacob. Hagar had Ishmael, which is where we get a lot of the Arabic countries from. And Islam comes through that as well. So this is the story that he's going to tell here. But he who was of the bondwoman, Isaac, was born after the flesh. So here's what's fascinating, this concept that Paul's bringing in, that Abraham and Hagar had intercourse, thus resulting in Ishmael. But he of the free woman was by promise. Now here's what's fascinating is God intervened so that Sarah could have Isaac. If you remember from the story, Sarah and Abraham are in their 90s. In fact, it mentions in the story that Sarah has basically entered menopause. She's no longer experiencing periods. She's women have a finite window for being able to get pregnant, and she's past that window. And that's clear, even in the Old Testament. It talks about that in Genesis. I believe that is in Genesis 21, that's mentioned. And here's the thing is, in order for Sarah to give birth, it had to be a divine intervention. And that's what he's bringing up in verse 23 here. Verse 24, which things are for an allegory. So he's using this story of Sarah and Hagar as an allegory to help us understand a principle, okay? For these two are the two covenants, the one from the Mount Sinai, which gendereth to bondage, which is Agar or Hagar. For this Hagar is Mount Sinai in Arabia, and answereth to Jerusalem, which now is, and is in bondage with her children. But Jerusalem, which is above, is free, which is the mother of us all. I'm going to pause for just a second here so we can talk about this a little bit more, okay? So he's saying Hagar and Sarah represent two different covenants, okay? Hagar was given a promise through Abraham that her son would be a large nation, but actually be he would have 12 princes to be his ancestors, which Jacob gets 12 sons to be the sons of Israel, the tribes of Israel later on. And then through Sarah is Isaac and then Jacob, who has the 12 sons and things as well. So, and even in the scriptures in chapter 21 of Genesis, God says the real covenant, the main covenant is going to go through Isaac, not Ishmael. Ishmael's getting more of a physical covenant of lots of children, but Isaac's going to get the priesthood and the spiritual stuff will go with him, not just physical. So Paul is bringing this story in to talk about that the law of Moses is the old covenant, that Jesus Christ and his gospel is the new covenant that makes us free. That's what he's getting at here. Now, Bruce R. McConkie had a comment to make on this himself, which I thought was really interesting. If I can find my place again, I just lost it. Let me pull up his quote here. So he says, Paul here uses the life of Abraham as an allegory to dramatize the superiority of the gospel over the law of Moses, a mode of teaching designed to drive his doctrine home anew each time his hearers think of Abraham and his life. Hagar, the bondwoman, bore Ishmael, and Sarah, the free woman, brought forth Isaac. Ishmael was born after the flesh, while Isaac was a child of promise, came forth after the Spirit. Hagar is thus made to represent the Old Covenant, the law of Moses, the covenant under which men were subject to the bondage of sin, while Sarah symbolizes the New Covenant, the gospel, the covenant under which men are made free from bondage and sin through Christ. Mount Sinai, from whence the law came, that's where Moses went up to the mountains to get the law of Moses and the Ten Commandments, and Jerusalem, from whence it is now administered. So they came down from Sinai and eventually went to Jerusalem in the Promised Land. And their children are in bondage. But the spiritual Jerusalem, the heavenly city of which the saints shall be citizens, or Zion, is symbolized by Sarah, and she is the mother of free men. Sarah, who was so long barren as our spiritual mother, has now made us all, like Isaac, heirs of promise. but is now as it was then. Those born after the flesh war against those born of the Spirit. And as God rejected Ishmael and accepted Isaac, so does he now reject those who cleave to the law of Moses and accept those who turn to Christ. So that's, again, this idea of the spiritual law supersedes the old law. The law that Jesus had is the spiritual law, and it supersedes the letter of the law that Moses was, basically. Absolutely fascinating how this cool analogy, how this pulls together. And I love that this idea centers around women and women's roles, which is an important symbol and important part for us to remember. So let's go on here. Verse 27, he says, "For it is written, Rejoice, thou barren that bearest not." This is Sarah. "Break forth and cry, thou that travailest not, for the desolate hath many more children than she which hath an husband." It's talking about how Sarah will be more blessed than Hagar. Verse 28, "Now we, brethren, as Isaac was, are the children of promise. But as then he that was born after the flesh persecuted him that was born after the Spirit, even so it is now." Now that's referring to the idea that after Isaac was born, Ishmael wasn't nice. He kind of teased and harassed Isaac. And even though there's like 12 years difference in age between these two young men, this is at the party of when Isaac is accepted as the heir to Abraham. They have a little party. He's about 3 years old when he gets weaned off of his mom, so he's not breastfed anymore. That's usually they have this little party to say the baby has survived. He's now a part of the family. And at that party, Isaac is kind of teased or belittled by Ishmael, because Ishmael feels like he should be the one that gets that covenant. And so Sarah is like, nope, Hagar and Ishmael got to go. You guys got to get out of here. In order for Isaac and me to have our status, Hagar and Ishmael have to go. So she tells Abraham, kick him out. Abraham kicks them out, basically. But nicely. He tries to give them some water and some food to take with them on their journey, but not a lot. So that's what he's talking about here in verse 29. Now, verse 30, "Nevertheless, what saith the scripture? Cast out the bondwoman and her son, for the son of the bondwoman shall not be heir with the son of the free woman." That's what I just talked about. Sarah got pissed and wanted them out. Verse 31, "So then, brethren, we are not children of the bondwoman, but of the free." So again, we are under the new covenant, the spiritual covenant, not the old covenant. And that's how he's making this work out. It's not necessarily the most favorable light for Hagar, because in the actual story, Hagar actually gets visited by God twice. Sarah doesn't. So Hagar gets some divine interventions, some divine spiritualness and connections with God that's really cool. In fact, she's noted as the first woman to give God a name in the Bible, because she, after she tries to escape Sarah when Sarah was disciplining her after she got pregnant, that God helps her out a little bit. So interesting idea, and how he brings in this Old Testament concept back in, like he's been using Abraham this whole time as well. So fascinating little story we have there. I'm glad you were able to see that. If you want to learn more, go look at some of the research I've done in my master's degree stuff. You can look at that playlist to find more. I talk about it quite a bit there. For spring of 2025 is when I did that research. And you can even go look up the videos in Genesis 16 and 21 to get more of the story back then as well. So for now, let's jump to the next chapter as we continue the book of Galatians.